Good day. I am Desiree Nanuses, a research scholar based in the Modern and Contemporary Art Department as an interdisciplinary Chesterdale Fellow. My second name, Dibasan, means do it for yourself. And this is of particular importance that up until I completed my master's degree, I had omitted, not intentionally, including my second name. Now I make a conscious choice to do this daily. A name in African cultures represents symbolic meaning. Also of note is that the Met documentation relating to my placement is the Michael C. Rockefeller wing. Very symbiotic to the worlds within which I coexist. To situate you within my current practice and its aims, I provide a purview. When I was 11 years old, I had a conversation with my dad when I had to fill out applications for high school. And I said, Deepa, I'm not going to that German school. You want me to feel stupid again? I want to go to the English school. And he responded, you will go to that German school. You will learn everything they know. And the only difference between you and them will be the color of your skin. The background of this conversation stems from colonization. Before independence, I was attending a school taught in Kwekwekovap, my vernacular. After independence, my parents, both teachers, enrolled me in the colored school. You can imagine what schooling was like, not knowing a word of English or Afrikaans, which was the mode of instruction. My chapters that I extract from to share with you include, but are not limited to, themes of decolonization, institutionalism, representation, bracket open, rethinking museums as African phenomenon, multiple narratives, including collecting, documenting, researching, and interpretation of all these voices for various audiences, maybe through education or exhibition making or writing. Lastly, ownership, reclaiming the knowledge, inserting the missing narratives, acknowledging the importance of the indigenous knowledge and its systems. And I conclude by asking questions about who are the purveyors and stewards of this knowledge. The title of my presentation is The Politics of My Skin, an autoethnographic practice informed by both Titus Kafar, representative in this presentation as artist, and Denise Murrell, representative of exhibitions and exhibition making decolonial practices. Titus Kafar's monumental inversions serves as a first example of such critical approach. Monumental inversions consist of a series of sculptures looking at traditional monuments of the United States of America's forefathers. One example is Language of the Forgotten, created in 2017, a cutout mold of the bust of Thomas Jefferson's head in profile, and in the front of it an image of Sally Hemings, a female slave believed to be the mother of Jefferson's children, etched in a piece of glass. This series brings into focus the conversations around the removal of Confederate sculptures and resonates with Namibia's removal of the monument Writer Denkmal in 2013 and other artists and organizations-led protests. These can be compared to the hashtag Rhodes Must Fall protest movements that began in 2015 originally. Denise Murrell's exhibition, The Black Model, from Jericho to Matisse, concentrating on the period from the French Revolution to the mid-20th century in France, offers a second example by showing how images of Black people have been constructed, deconstructed, and reconstructed in response to the political and social tendencies of society and artists over time. By adopting a cross-disciplinary approach covering the history of art, history of ideas and anthropology, an increasing number of artists and scholars critically address aesthetic, political, and social issues inherent in curatorial practice. Correcting imperialistic wrongs commenced with addressing my classification on my birth certificate. History is not in the present, it is the present. We carry our history with us. We are our history. If we pretend otherwise, we are literally criminals. James Baldwin said in I'm Not Your Negro in 2006, various forms of injustice and oppression against indigenous peoples throughout modern history have been intrinsically connected to the Western ethnographic gaze. A lived example is my grandmother, who lived with her husband Zedekiah in Hoogland Park, Windhoek, until the old location, forceful removal of the people to Katutura's Nama location, Katutura meaning we will not move in Herero and Namibian indigenous language. And my father chose to run away with his family from Windhoek to Otjiwarongo in northern Namibia due to the political unrest. He is Griqua and came to Namibia with the then South African police and remained in Windhoek for his work as detective. A couple of years after his relocation, my grandmother was notified of her husband's passing as he was shot in the line of duty and went back to Windhoek to bury him. The displacement and its entire dispensation which ensued to the areas she now lives in northern Namibia had all my grandmother's children and grandchildren classified as Damora in the colonial rule. Subsequently, the entire lineage follows this classification, which I am of inheritance. These problems of definition and identity formation are entangled in the processes of colonization. Theorists and writers I explore include James Baldwin, Chinua Achebe, who paved the way for African writers through anecdotes and stories of the indigenous people. He told us to write our own stories. Chimamanda Adichie, who followed in his footsteps, cautions us against the danger of a single story and calls for multipluralism in representation and the inclusion of minority views and narratives. Steve Biko championed for the emancipation of the African mind through the education systems. And Lwazi Lushaba, who teaches on decolonial thought, commencing his lectures by calling on the spirits of them that paved the way through a chant, including Nyerere, Winnie, Biko, a very strong nostalgia. Most recent, I came to study Chick Auntie Diop's writings, whilst at the Met referenced as a singular research text for the exhibition, The African Origin of Civilization. What is decolonization, then I ask you? Does it just mean the inclusion of minorities, their views, diversity in human resources and programs, ethical fair practice, and the moral compass? Some choose to acknowledge the term, others not. Is it an intentional consciousness and awareness in daily activities? Can it become a way of life and of being? In a global context, what does it mean? What does it look like? It can be acknowledgement, referencing genocides. It can be reparations and restitution too, and arguments are made daily for all the above. So I then ask, when did it start? My dad and my uncles endured captivity and jail time for hosting meetings in classrooms, mobilizing in the immediate communities, transportation of material, branded SWAPO regalia, flags, caps, t-shirts, in my terminology, material culture. As me and my sister were told to play on top of the combi engine to camouflage the boxes hidden underneath the luggage. When will it end? Will it end? Hilda Hein refers to the museum's explicit, preservative, and presentational function, which makes museums sites of canon formation, deformation, extension, and revision. She says as an institutional blessing, museum as canon maker in 1993. We store images of artifacts in our memory. Images play an important role in the cultural memory because they represent a point of reference for my reflections on and of the world. As an interdisciplinary fellow, I have the advantage working across departments, and because of that conversation with my dad that plunged me into an institution, the German high school, I have a keen interest in the institutions I choose to associate. Institutionalism, I believe, has to do with systems and programs upheld by policies and frameworks that have consequences of rewards and discipline to fulfill visions and missions. My lived experience included segregation, isolation, being in a classroom where you are a maximum of two whom are people of color and being made fun of for the way you look and talk. That dehumanizing ethos that objectifies you and consequently classifies you as an other does something inside of you. To complete the journey, I morphed from high school to university, and as my dad said it, the only difference between them and me was the color of my skin. I was comfortable, perhaps too comfortable, plan. We gained tremendous insight when we commenced the hashtag What's Your Story project. Hashtag What's Your Story was a 3-part project comprised of an exhibition, a mapping of Namibian visual arts in global discourse, online platforms, and an introduction to public art through a documentation of artists' making processes from concept to final works in the exhibition. Another chapter which looks at artworks more closely is multiple narratives, decolonial documenting, indiscriminate readings of the objects. I commence with a work from the Met, from the exhibition In America, a Lexicon of Fashion. This patchwork informs my conceptual approach, connecting the literature and the indigenous knowledge of art, design, objects, and architecture with the indigenous knowledge associations it necessitates. A$AP Rocky wore this coat to the 2021 Met Gala. I stood within the show and I felt at home. Who is Evelina Uhams? Who is Elfrida Uhams? Who is Bright Nanuses? No one asks you, who is Ralph Lauren? Faith Ringgold's political and expressive narrative quotes I wish to put in conversation with patchwork and quoting practices of the Khoisan, Nama, and Damara people from Namibia, my heritage. So I tell you this story. During my oral history collations, I was in Gibeon in the south of Namibia. Martha Kokerbom told me that the dresses and the exciting colors or muted colors and whether you cut strip triangles or rectangles or squares was determinant of the offcuts you had. And you had to look towards tones, or if you had enough material, you could choose the geometric shape. As a young girl, she remembers her grandmother measured her and made a dress for her. This dress was hidden. Sometime later, her grandmother called her and told her to put on the dress and walk in a particular direction and play there until sundown and only return near sundown. It happened a number of times during her teen years, and the dress was never kept with her other clothes. She asked her mom sometime after independence why she would be sent out to the fields. Her mom explained that the dress was a coded message. The grandmother housed or offered asylum to the freedom fighters as her husband himself had left to fight. She would receive word someone needed a place to stay, and the girl in the field would ascertain to this person was safe or if there were police patrolling the area. Of note was the label on attachment at the Met, including narratives added afterwards, combining the family's and making this a takeaway for an engager is reflective of a decolonial. The chapter on representation looks at museums as an African phenomenon, sacred spaces and places, the contextualization of the object through the modes of display, use of aids like photographs or videos showing functionality and use, curatorial knowledge formation as an action practice. There's the headdress that represents a contemporary pillow, but one example that I'd like to go into is the bow and arrow, and I refer to it as an object of love. This bow and arrow perspective, not mentioned in any literary study of voice, evoked a curiosity. In the traditional Namaquesan culture, when a young man had his eye on an eligible woman, he signals his intention to marry her by doing just this. Fortunately, the special love bow he uses is small and made to bounce off her lightly. The girl then has a choice to make. If she loves him, she will pick it up, the arrow, and place it on her heart. But if not, she will leave it lying on the dusty ground. Dissemination of curatorial knowledge in various fora and media starts with research, publication, and dissemination by us as museum practitioners. What is the takeaway for the various audiences, and how do we create this access to information? An example of an exhibition that I'm still grappling with is the origin of civilization in the Met. I will therefore make reference to the exhibition that followed after the hashtag What's Your Story at the National Art Gallery of Namibia, the Blank Vintage Triennial 2020. The judge, the initial overview of all submissions, deliberated and added a category titled Textile Art due to the number of textile submissions and the quality of these submissions. What you see on screen is Ina Maria's narrative textile titled I Can't Breathe, just after the George Floyd murder, and she won the first prize. The judges also renamed the craft category to customary contemporary art in relation to that. It's not an ethnographic practice like they're still creating now, and the modes that they're using now, it's the current representation is not fit for it. In their judges report, in their catalogs, we make intentional reference to these decolonial practices. Davido's artwork, Ofukwa Ofukwa, a technique pointillism he employs, he tells me that the image translates to the Mahangu grain, which is his cultural point of reference. For me as the curator, it is essential to write his intention, to talk about it every time I mention the artwork, and to teach on this artist's own decolonial practice. So I ask the questions about ownership again. Who must be the custodian and purveyor of this knowledge? The aim is a transformed form of curatorial practice that may serve as a personal model for decolonizing curatorial research and practice. Just as the colonizing process cannot be disentangled from an ethnographic practice of defining the local, the native, so the African people's initiatives for decolonization cannot be disengaged from reclaiming the indigenous histories as vehicles of ideological resistance to colonialism. So in conclusion, you may ask, why do I do this? Why am I consumed with this study? I will attempt at situating it within Azar Langa's The Handover. Heavy is the head that wears the crown. I have a daughter. I am responsible central in her life to the generational passing down of indigenous knowledge, the transfer of skills, but also to extend and bestow my blessing on her. If I do not document, I commit an injustice to both our histories. The technique itself employed by the artist encapsulates smoke painting, an understanding of the process as a metaphor for Africa's ancestral and spiritual media. It is my silent sacrifice in illuminating and purifying our lived reality. Thank you so much for listening.